This video we are going to be covering the factors of immigration. Why were people coming to the US? What pushed them from their countries and what was attracting them in the US to actually leave their homeland. We're also going to be talking about the two immigration islands, Ellis Island on the East Coast and Angel Island on the West Coast. Using this graph, you can see the immigration from 1821 up to 2000. You can see how it was steadily increasing and there was a huge boom, and then it slowly started going down and there was a huge drop during the Great Depression and then steadily rose up again. So we're going to be talking primarily about that huge leap right in the middle in the late 1800s and early 1900s. There are two factors of why people come to the United States. You have the push factor, which is something that drives people from their homeland, and then you have the pull factor, which attracts people to a new area, and in this case, the US. This web explains the four push factors that pushed people from their lands. They were either fleeing persecution, they were experiencing famine, severe famine or poverty, they had political turmoil in their homeland, or there was a lack of space, a lack of farmland in Europe. You can see the different groups that this applied to. For example, the Irish were escaping poverty and they were also escaping the lack of farmland. The Mexicans were escaping the political turmoil that was happening there. So people came for different reasons to the US. This explains the push factors a little bit more in detail. So if you were fleeing persecution, you had the Russian Jews that 3 million of them, actually came to escape organized attacks on their towns. Basically, they were being slaughtered, they were being murdered. So they were coming to the US to basically stay alive, to avoid being killed. And this is a picture of the Russian Jews that were waiting at the port of Liverpool. They were waiting to board a ship to come over to the United States. This is a picture of some of the slaughters that were happening to the Russian Jews. Basically, you see a pile of dead bodies. So this is what they were escaping. They didn't want to end up in a picture like this. They were coming here to basically survive, to live. The second push factor was poverty, famine. So you had over 1 million people that were dying in Ireland due to starvation because the Irish potato famine, where you had a bug that was kind of going through all the Irish crops and it was just basically ruining it all, so they couldn't eat any. As a result of the potato famine, 1.5 million Irish immigrants came to the United States. The third push factor is political turmoil, and that was referring to the Mexicans. So thousands of Mexicans crossed the border to escape the violence during the Mexican Revolution. It was basically survival. They did not want to be caught up in the war that was happening down there. And the final push factor was the lack of farmland in Europe. Land was scarce. It was overpopulated in Europe, but there was a lot of it in the US. So instead of just kind of barely getting by or having to fight for land or paying an extremely enormous amount of money for land, coming to the US just made more sense financially for these people that were trying to survive. So now you know the four factors that were pushing people from their homeland. So let's cover some of the things that attracted people to the United States. Why did they select the US when they could have gone pretty much anywhere in the world? There was a promise of freedom and a promise of a better life that existed in the US when other countries in the world didn't have that appeal. The idea that you could come here and you could start over and you could make something of yourself was very attractive to people that didn't have that opportunity back at home. You were also coming here to join other family and friends. You would have, cousins that were living here, neighbors that were living here. So you would go and you would form these little communities with people that you already knew. You also had the appeal of jobs. American employers would hire immigrants because it was cheap labor. I mean, think about the Transcontinental Railroad, where you had the Chinese and the Irish that basically built it. So the jobs were here, which means that they could get money, even if it was only a little bit, but they could get money to support their family. It was also cheap to buy land here, especially out west. So where it would cost a lot more money at home, they could come here, get more land for a cheaper amount of money. And then it was also cheap to get here, even if the conditions to actually arrive weren't the best. but they did get here in one piece, and they did have the opportunities for jobs, for family, and for making something of yourself. It was the American dream, you could say. Ellis Island, the first stop of immigrants when they finally arrived to the U.S. From 1892 to 1924, 22 million immigrants went through the procedures here in Ellis Island. This would be their first stop. If they were accepted and they passed all the requirements, then they would go on into, the U.S. and they would go on to make their living. However, there were immigrants that were rejected for one reason or another, and they ended up going back to their homeland. On the other side of the U.S., on the Pacific side, the West Coast, you had Angel Island. This was primarily where all the Asians came through, because obviously California is a lot closer to Asia than New York is. Obviously, the number of Asian immigrants coming in did not compare in number to the amount of Europeans coming in through the East Coast, but you still had thousands of immigrants that came here during the years of function at Angel Island. Once you arrived in Ellis Island, you had to go through a series of steps or an inspection process. You would get there, you'd be kind of directed into the main building. You would go through a medical inspection, which was pretty detailed. They were looking for lots of different things. You would also go through a legal inspection. They didn't want to admit criminals or people that they thought were slightly suspicious. If you passed these steps, then congratulations! You have now been admitted to the United States of America, and you would go ahead and come into New York, New Jersey, and then from New York, New Jersey, you would go into other parts of the country. However, if you failed, you would be sent back home. Here is a picture of the main hall in Ellis Island. This picture was taken somewhere between 1902 to 1913, but you can see how everything is very organized. You have the pens, which are just kind of like holding rooms for these people, to go in through the first mental inspection. If you were mentally unstable, you would not be allowed to come into the U.S. So they were going to basically figure out whether or not you were crazy. And this is what that same room looks like today. Today, obviously, it's just a great big hall. All the pens have been removed, but it's still in existence today if you guys ever go to Ellis Island. So, your notes are complete if you're able to answer the following 4 questions. What are the 4 push factors of immigration? Be able to know who exactly applied or what factor applied to which group of people. So, the Russian Jews applied to the persecution. The political turmoil applied to the Mexicans. Be sure that you know that. What are the 4 pull factors of immigration? And be able to provide the same specifics. Where is Ellis and Angel Island located? Make sure you know the difference. And then be able to kind of give a summary of the inspection process at Ellis Island. They couldn't just get here and, get a job and go to work. They had to be inspected. What was that about? Don't forget to answer your blog, and I will see you guys tomorrow.